right, we're live.
This is Senate Appropriations, and we have taken a short break waiting for Ledge Council to come and walk through what we have put together as sort of an amendment that addresses funding and addresses the requirement, includes the requirement to have the look back or affirmative action by the part of the legislature. And other changes. So I thought it would be helpful if Ellen would walk us through the amendment that hopefully captures all the discussion that we have had and the latest comments and the revised funding requirements that have been identified by the administration. So thank you, Ellen, for making yourself available. If you want to put it on the screen, I guess that might be the easiest way to walk through this amendment.
Sure. Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. If Andrea, if you wouldn't mind making me a co-host also. Great, thank you. So the amendment is draft 1.1 dated today's date to 2023, 1 p.m. And I will share my screen. Can you see the amendment?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So the first instance of amendments, there are 12 instances of amendment in this document, and they're point amendments. So if anyone, I'll walk you through where the changes are going to occur, but if anyone needs me to point out a page number, I can do that as well. So the first instance of amendment, instance one and first and second are related, and these relate to the check back provision. So first, a new statutory section is being added. It's rulemaking authority in 8131. So notwithstanding any other provision of law to the contrary, the commission shall not file proposed rules with the Secretary of State or issue any orders implementing the clean heat standard without specific authorization enacted by the General Assembly.
Now, would you please confirm that that is essentially an updated version of the language that we voted on? I can't remember. I think it was anyway. We voted as a committee last year to have us with the bill.
Yes, this is the language from last year's H715.
Okay,
and
thank
it's
you.
the language that was sent to the governor. So it did pass. And then related to it is also nearly identical language. So in the second instance of amendment, it's striking out the existing final rules provision in S5, and it's adding new language that was again in last year's H715. So in the implementation section, the new section on final rules shall read, on or before January 15th, 2025, the commission shall submit to the General Assembly final proposed rules to implement the clean heat standard. On to page 2. The commission shall not file the final proposed rules with the Secretary of State until specific authorization is enacted by the General Assembly to do so. Notwithstanding 3 VSA 820, 831, 836 through 840, and 841A upon affirmative authorization enacted by the General Assembly authoring the adoption of rules implementing the clean heat standard, the commission shall file as the final proposed rules implementing the clean heat standard approved by the General Assembly with the Secretary of State and LCAR pursuant to 841. The filing shall include everything required under 3 VSA 838, A1 through 5, 8 through 13, 15, and 16, and 841B. So I'll stop there quickly and just review. So under the current S5 draft, the language says that the commission shall not submit the final rules until at least June 1, 2025 to LCAR and the Secretary of State. This is changing that. Although, and it does require in the current bill that by January 15, 2025, the rules go to the General Assembly. So it's keeping that. The rules must come to the General Assembly. But then it's changing it to say that the rules can't be filed with the Secretary of State until the General Assembly makes an affirmative authorization to do so. And then it notwithstands some parts of the Administrative Procedure Act. I don't have the full list in front of me, but it removes a few of the pieces of the Administrative Procedure Act that relate to LCAR's review. Because as you may recall from last year's discussion, the LCAR, the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, when they review rules from agencies, sort of stand in the place of the General Assembly and review for specific elements. And because these rules are being submitted to the entire General Assembly for review, it's waiving aspects of the APA related to LCAR because the whole General Assembly is sort of acting as LCAR here. And then in number 3, down on line 11, the review, adoption, and effect of the rules implementing the Clean Heat Standard shall be governed by 3 VSA 841C, 842, exclusive of subdivision B4, 843, 845, and 846, exclusive of subdivision A3. And once adopted and effective, the amendments to the rules implementing the Clean Heat Standard shall be made in accordance with the Administrative Procedure Act, 3 VSA Chapter 25. So all of the sections that are referenced on this page are elements of 3 VSA Chapter 25, the Administrative Procedure Act. And so as I just mentioned, it's waiving some of them, these are all the same sections that were in last year's H715 that passed.
Yes, Senator Starr? Yes.
Yeah, I'm wondering, all this is gonna come back at our next legislative session, not in 25, but in 24, right?
So no, there is a report due from the Public Utility Commission on how the rule adoption is going in 2024, but the final rules, which this section is referring to, will come to the General Assembly in January of 2025.
So it would be a new legislature that the final rule would come to.
Right. Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah. And obviously this is kind of a deliberative process to, and with that interim report, but it's important. Yes, it would be, you know, who that legislative body will look like in 2025, 26.
Right.
Other questions that I might not see? Okay.
I have a question about the credits that are in the S5 as passed by the Natural Resources Committee. Are those reviewable, or does it assume that those credits that different fuel oil dealers will have to put up with or buy or whatever, is that part of the bill, or could that be changed? Or, I mean, I'm trying to understand how much leeway would change that, because that's really one of the areas that I've heard the most criticism from. I've obviously gotten literally thousands of emails, we all have, against the bill. But one of the criticisms that I've taken to heart, particularly here in the southwest corner of Vermont, where a lot of the fuel dealers come from New York State, and people mostly buy their fuel in New York. So I want to understand this fuel credit thing. Would that still be part of the law?
Yes.
You want to speak to that, Ellen?
Oh, yeah, so there's a few different elements that we're talking about here. So yes, the Public Utility Commission is going to hire a consultant to do the analysis on how to calculate how much each credit, each measure is going to get in credit. And so they will need to hire that consultant who will then create what's going to be called the schedule of emissions. So they will look at the different fuels that could be used, and then the different measures like heat pumps and other weatherization measures to determine a schedule, so that there is the ability for people to determine how much credit each thing would get. And so that would be part of the rules. Additionally, the PUC has
Ellen, I want to stop you there. They would
Sure.
be part of the rules, but they're part of the rules that would have to be subject to review and understanding and defined, that would come back to the General Assembly for review and enactment.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
But if it's not
Additionally-
workable, that's what my, if the study finds it's not workable, would it be thrown out of the bill or would it be still part of it? That's where I'm having a hard time deciding whether to, I can certainly support the amendments that have been proposed here, but whether I can support the bill or not.
Well, I think it's my understanding, and I guess we need to be very clear on it, is if in fact that potential study identifies, it says what is achievable, an impact on rate and bill impacts, whether the targets are attainable. So I think in some ways it is it envisions credit, but I think that the work and the analysis is really going to tell us the feasibility, but I need to have confirmation of that, because I think this was what we were hoping to achieve, is those very concerns around the program design and the long-term potential and setting attainable targets is all part of the work that we have felt needed to be done before we would be comfortable saying we wanted to move forward with anything.
Right. Well, that's
And
definitely my
won't be-
position.
and won't be voted on until, or won't move forward until the legislature votes in a positive to move it forward, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's my intent, that this language that we passed last year would do. Because I think Senator Sears is identifying the concerns that many of us have, and that is, what is going to be the affordability? What is going to be the impact on different populations in Vermont? What is going to be the business impact? What is attainable, and to be realistic in what's attainable, and identifying real world barriers that are out there. So I think that this language was a way of saying we want to move forward, but we need to do it in an informed way. Some people are obviously feeling very different, either positive or negative about the bill. But until we have sort of the blanks filled in and fully understand what the creation of a clean heat standard would mean to whom and how, nothing would be moved forward until we have that data and that analysis before us so that we can act in an informed way.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
quick question for Ellen. And I can't see Ellen. Ellen, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm looking at the language and I'm remembering our discussion from last year. It says that we have to have affirmative authorization enacted by the General Assembly. My understanding is that includes and provides a role for the governor in that enactment. Is that correct?
Yes, enactment of any action that you want to be legally binding will need to go through enactment, which is bicameral enactment, which would require both bodies to vote, and then the enactment would be sent to the governor and would go through the standard process where if the governor were to veto it, it could be then be overridden.
Yep, thank you. Just wanted to make it clear that this is something we're talking about, a check back that is essentially a bill that needs to move through the process, and the governor has a constitutionally guaranteed role in that process.
Yes.
Thank you.
So does that answer your question, Senator Sears?
To a great extent, yeah,
Okay.
but it still leaves me concerned that they've decided to go with these credits, and I don't see that changing.
The study may change that.
Well, hopefully the study would evaluate if that's not feasible. So I think last year, in fact, the very entities that are saying vote no on this asked us last year very passionately that please have a check back to allow this very process and this vetting to occur. And because it was viewed as important to really fully understand something that is kind of new for all of us, and to fully address those concerns. So I do want to link back not only what we did last year, but the check back provision was something that was specifically requested by our fuel suppliers and companies around the state. So it's doing, again, what they felt was so important last year with the legislation. Other questions? Otherwise, Ellen, you want to keep going?
Madam Chair, can I ask a quick question?
Oh, yes.
What is included and excluded? I just trying to double check in under the section modifying what elements of rulemaking are and are not included. In 838C1, there is a B and C. B is compare the economic impact of the rule, the economic impact of other alternatives to the rule, including no rule on the subject, or a rule having separate requirements for small business. And so is that included in the rulemaking still?
And have to ask Ellen to please clarify that level of nuance in rulemaking.
Yes. And so I think you were citing 838C.
Right, the economic impact analysis, and it's got some further specs underneath it, but yeah, so I was hoping that that was still specified as part of what will be required as even after the amendment.
So no. As I read this list, I think I am recalling last year's discussion that 838C is not on here in part because the additional reporting that's already required in the other sections of S5 include economic impacts. And so they're with the rules being submitted to the General Assembly, they have to also submit the check back reports. And so I would think last year your discussion about waiving some of those other analyses is because the report that's due with the rules requires that. But if you'd like to look at the elements of the check back report, that's in subsection I, and I can read that language if you'd like.
Why don't you please do that, Ellen?
Okay. So in the bill as recommended by the Senate Natural Resources Committee in January, with the proposed rules, the commission has to submit to the General Assembly a report which encompasses both subsection H and subsection I of this section 6. And so it's on page 35 into 36 if anyone's looking at the bill. And so in the report, they first have to suggest revenue streams that could be used to support the clean heat standard. But also in addition, they'll need to submit this written report and be available for oral testimony before the General Assembly. And the report shall include, to the extent available, estimates of the impact of the clean heat standard on customers, including impacts on customer rates and fuel bills for participating and non-participating customers, net impacts on total spending on energy for thermal sector end uses, fossil fuel reductions, greenhouse gas emission reductions, and if possible, impacts on economic activity and employment. The modeled impacts shall estimate high, medium, and low price impacts. The reports shall also recommend any legislative action needed to address enforcement or other aspects of the clean heat standard. So that list does include both economic impacts as well as the greenhouse gas emission impacts, which encompasses the environmental impact analysis that is normally required for LCAR. And that also that section doesn't specifically include, but there will also be that potential study that DPS is going to do as well.
That answered the question. It sounds like there's a lot of analysis and studies to come forward to the full legislature to support that deliberation.
Sure. So thank you. I just wanted to double check because this sounds like the same things are covered, but they're tailored more specifically to the rule that's being developed. For instance, going as far as to specify impacts on participating non-APA. So thank you. I just want to make sure we were doing it, even if we weren't relying on the APA to do it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Senator Starr.
Yes, I was wondering, Ellen, is there anything in the bill in regards to reporting a colored diesel or diesel fuel? I'd heard at one point there was going to be some reporting. Is that in the bill or not in the bill?
Yes, there is a directive early in the bill to the tax department to start collecting the fuel tax information. So when a fuel dealer has to file their fuel tax, the Department of Taxes is directed to update their form so that the form will now specify what type of fuel is being, the fuel tax is being paid on, because currently it doesn't disaggregate the data that way. And so it may not be able to tell which fuel is being specifically paid for. And so that should help us and then in the clean heat standard provisions also, entities will need to list the types of fuels they are specifically selling. And so this should be able to identify which fuels should be covered and which should not be covered.
So my question is, if we're talking about a clean heat standard, why, if we aren't looking for numbers to do something else other than heating, why is that in the bill? And maybe that's not for you to answer, but for the chair of the committee to answer.
So I will say that fuels that are sold that are not for the heating space, so residential, commercial, or industrial heating only, those are intended to only be covered. And so I was merely indicating that if a dealer is selling multiple types of fuel, the form is supposed to be able to identify that so that the non-covered fuels aren't counted as part of this. So there is no intention to cover the fuels that are sold that are not for heating purposes.
So are you talking about for agricultural purposes, Senator Starr?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Farmers use off-road fuel, and I other than knowing that they could possibly be next, getting caught up in all this, I just wonder why we're making the people report on it.
It really is not intended to cover any of the fuels that are not used for heating fuel. The only way that would be covered is if a fuel seller is selling multiple types, including the agricultural fuel. And so it's just so that there's clarity on which fuels are being covered for this program.
I'd rather hear that from the chairman, because I know what you folks are told, and sometimes there's other intentions.
Well, maybe, maybe the chair can clarify that we are delineating between fuels that are used for heating of buildings as opposed to agricultural purposes.
So, yes, that is correct. And part of the discussion around the forms, for instance, was because all fuels were being reported on a single line, you couldn't distinguish what fuels were going where to be used for what purpose.
So if, Madam Chair,
Yes.
so to clarify, the bill is bending over backwards to not cover the fuels that Bobby is talking about, Senator Starr is talking about. So we want that in the bill to make sure that your concern isn't reality.
Well, I have concerns that reality is that once we get the numbers of these off-road fuels, the number of gallons, some people will say, well, boy, we ought to get onto that and make farmers buy electric tractors and along with electric cars, and that, I mean, it just leaves anxiety in the minds of farmers knowing how things actually work, and you can tell the best story in the world, but they get up early in the morning and you don't fool them too often.
Well, Senator Starr, I guess when we see the rules, for anyone who plans to be around that long, I'm not sure I'm going to make it through the week. It's something that we absolutely have to make sure that is clearly delineated, because I don't think that anybody has, that's an intent, and we need to make sure that that doesn't happen. And so it's a from the ag perspective, it's certainly something that is of concern. Other questions of Ellen, or shall we keep moving on?
Okay, so back to the amendment. So as I mentioned before, the first two instances of amendment relate to the check back provision. The third instance of amendment, which is at the bottom of page 2, adds new language to the intent section of the Clean Heat Standard program. And so it adds a new sentence to read, the Clean Heat Standard shall, to the greatest extent possible, maximize the use of available federal funds to deliver clean heat measures. And so I will also mention, so we haven't walked through the language specifically, but in the finding section, there is a new finding in S5 that wasn't in H715 from last year, and it recognizes the availability of the funds from the IJA and the IRA federal laws that are providing a significant amount of funding that may be available for use for this exact type of work. And so this is now adding that reference into the intent section as well, that there's an intent to use as many funds as possible for this work.
Okay, this is consistent with what we talked about last Friday or Thursday. Any questions on that? It's normal practice. If there's, I think in in total, there's like, what, 26 billion available nationwide. And so if there are ways that we can utilize those resources to advance thermal efficiency, then we certainly want to make sure we're designing a program to maximize them. Okay, we'll move on then.
Yes. So on page 3, the 4th through 8th instances of amendment that I'll read through are the recommendations that the Senate Natural Resources Committee worked on that came from the Office of Racial Equity. The Office of Racial Equity submitted a memo with a number of points they recommended including in the bill. And so these amendments are capturing those recommendations. And so the first piece, which is in the 4th instance of amendment, is adding language in 8124 so that following the phrase "in plain terms," there will be the language "with translation services available." And so this is making sure that the requirements for obligated parties are in plain terms with translation services available. And so these are specifically the annual requirements that obligated parties will need to meet. Next, in the section, the 5th instance of amendment adds language to the equitable distribution of clean heat credits section. And so it's adding a new subdivision to read: customer income data collected shall be kept confidential by the Commission, the Department of Public Service, the obligated parties, and any entity that delivers clean heat measures. Next, the 6th instance of amendment, there's a penalty section for those entities that fail to meet the requirements. Currently, the penalty is 3 times, is an amount that would be equal to 3 times the amount they would have needed to pay per credit. And so this is raising it to 4 times that amount.
So what,
Yes, go ahead.
what is the regular penalty if we're talking about 4 times?
So currently under the bill, this is back to the credit, the price per credit that will be set by the Public Utility Commission. And so each party will need to have that amount of credits, and they'll need to purchase an amount that they're deficient by. And so there will be a statutory, or there will be a number set in the rule of what the per credit price is. And so if there's a violation, the PUC will look at how much that party was deficient by, and then it will be 3 times the amount that they were owed. And this is raising it to 4 times. And so I guess the short answer is this is one of the calculations that the PUC is directed to make as part of the rules.
So we don't know what that could add up to.
But we would by the time they do the final, I would
By
hope.
the time we get to vote on it again,
I think we
know.
would, I think so. And I think the reason the office indicated that they felt it should be 4 versus 3 was to discourage any effort to simply build it into the cost of doing business if it's small enough. I think that was in their comment, which I had sent out. I think everybody got a copy of the testimony. I think, Andrea, you sent it out. And so I gathered the committee looked at it and concurred that that would be the recommended standard, but everything, of course, is going to be subject to the final rules, and then ultimately what modifications are made by, as part of the enactment in the future by the full legislature. Okay, shall we go on?
Okay, the seventh instance of amendment is adding identical language that was mentioned above. This time it's adding it to the section of the bill specifically related to clean heat credits and what type of information is needed to get a clean heat credit. And so it's the type of information that needs to be filed. And so this is, again, adding the sentence, customer income data that is collected shall be kept confidential by the commission, the department, the obligated parties, and any entity that delivers clean heat measures. And then the eighth instance of amendment is adding a new subsection C in the implementation section. And so this is a section that lays out the process the PUC needs to follow when adopting their rules. And so there was a strengthening of the language that was recommended by the Office of Racial Equity. And so the subparagraph will now read, the commission shall invite organizations and communities recommended by the Equity Advisory Group to participate in the commission's public meetings and opportunities to comment. The prior language said that the PUC would seek input on who to invite, and this is directing them to invite anyone that the Equity Advisory Group recommends.
Now we're into the money.
Yes. Yes, so the ninth instance of amendment increases the amount of funds in the PUC's appropriation section. And so the S5, as it currently stands, appropriated $800,000 to the Public Utility Commission. And this is increasing that to $825,000 for the Public Utility Commission. And I believe that was to cover some of the translation services that were especially pointed out by the Office of Racial Equity.
So Jane, is number 9 and number 11, so does that add up to 17?
It does.
Or is
1
that
point.
not-
Yeah, it's right. These appropriations would have to be added up for the total. Yeah,
So it's
so yeah, and so we did.
1,725,000.
So I believe the bill as it came out was like about 1.2, and so what we've added, and which to me is really one of the most essential things to, and that was the 250 for the potential study, which is, and then so yes, it was adding on the cost of potential study, the additional money recommended by the Office of Racial Equity, and the request that Commissioner Tierney had, which, as you pointed out, added up to the 900,000 the other day.
Yeah. So it'd be really 1.725. 1
Right.
million. Yeah.
Yeah, because we added on some additional funding. And to me, if there's anything that absolutely has to be funded, based on my discussions with Secretary Moore, is the role that the potential study plays in all the work subsequent to that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we had the analyst, where the reference was made to attorney, Stephanie, or is that somewhere next? I thought it was 2 analysts and 1 attorney. I'm trying to recollect.
That's in the Public Service Department.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and so in S5 as passed by Senate Natural, there was 1 attorney for the Public Service Department and 1 analyst. And I think based on Commissioner Tierney's testimony last week, she was asking for an additional analyst. And so the 10th instance of amendment here, so that would be 3 new positions for for DPS, 1 attorney and 2 analysts.
Okay. All right.
And then the 11th instance, as we just discussed, increasing the department's budget appropriation for this work from $400,000 to $900,000. And related to that, the 12th instance of amendment specifically inserts the phrase "for conducting the potential study" to this language so that that is included as part of the work that the appropriated money can fund.
All right. All right, thank you for walking us through this. Maybe we can, okay. Other questions while we have Ellen here in terms of our proposed amendment? It's, as I say, it's incorporating the comments from the Office of Racial Equity, but the most important consideration, I think, in response to all the concerns and the unknowns of what's ahead is having that check back language that really requires before anything moves forward, final rules. It has to, all that information and analysis would come back to the full legislature, and nothing happens until there is that affirmative action on the part of the future legislature. And then, as I said, the additional funding for that had been identified last week. Other comments? Senator Sears, are you there? Senator Sears, oh, you are there. Okay, thank you. Do you have any questions more? I want to be sure. Senator Sears?
You're muted, Dick.
We're still muted.
Okay. Senator Sears is muted. That's, I just wanted to make sure we have walked through and everybody has had a chance to offer concerns. I just want to recognize, obviously, the volume of emails. I know that there is now an ad, and I know that certainly everybody is wanting to be very, very cautious about how we move on this. And so I'm believing that we have reflected the requests from the administration as it relates to the resources that are necessary, the steps that are required, the fact that nothing moves forward without affirmative action. Not, if you don't act, then it happens, as opposed to there has to be that full legislative process, as was pointed out, that would be in a form of another bill that would go through and be subject to veto by the governor if that's still of dispute. But it moves the process forward hopefully in a way that informs us and gets us the information that can address the very issues and concerns and projected impacts, both on the concern side as well as on the carbon emission progress side. So other comments with this amendment? Senator Baruth.
Madam Chair, if you'd entertain a motion, I would move the amendment.
Okay. All right. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, thank you. So we have a motion to move to approve the amendment that has been presented. And it's been seconded. Unless there's further discussion, this is to approve the amendment. Our clerk can call the roll.
Bruce,
Yes.
Senator Lyons doesn't look like she's here. Senator First.
Yes.
Did you call my name?
Yes.
Yes, I did.
Well, yes.
I have a chair of the Natural Resources Committee in front of you.
Oh,
Senator
sorry.
Lyons,
Yes, I didn't hear, that's why I asked.
Senator Sears,
Yes,
Senator Starr,
Yes,
Senator Westman, yes, Senator Kitchell.
Yes. Thank you very much, Ellen. I appreciate your making yourself available. Now that we've, is there a motion to move the bill as amended?
So moved.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Further discussion? Okay, so the motion is to move the bill favorably as amended by Senate Appropriations. You want to please call the roll?
I'm working on the sheet. I'll be there in just a second.
I'm sorry, Mr. Clerk. I didn't.
I'm getting there. All right. The bill, Baruth,
Yes.
Lyons,
Yes,
Senator Birchler,
Yes.
Sears,
no,
Senator Starr,
no,
Westman's no, Kitchell,
Yes.
4-3.
We were going to have more testimony on the 24 budget, but we ended up rescheduling because we have a public hearing tonight and felt we needed to give people a little bit of time. And that hearing starts at 5:30.
5:30, yep.
Okay, and you'll send us the Zoom information?
Yep, Mike Ferrand should have sent you, it's a different software. So if you haven't received the link from Mike, let me know.
Well, perhaps, but it kind of gets buried in the number of emails that we've had.
We'll ask him to resend it right before the 5:30
Yeah.
start
Okay.
too.
The other thing, we have to report out the bill as amended. The reporter of the bill
For this
I-
committee.
for this committee, right? We need to take it up. And I can be the reporter if people want.
People do.
Although I'm not going to be here. I don't think, Senator Baruth.
You're not going to be on the floor or zoomed in?
I'm going to be in quarantine until Friday.
Well, that's all right. Anybody can zoom into the floor
Okay.
if they're, COVID quarantine.
Okay, so then I didn't know if you preferred to have somebody who would be present in the State House as opposed to remote.
No, I think it would be best if you presented it, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. Then I obviously can't take the bill up myself.
We'll
We'll take care of
work,
that.
yeah, the clerk's office, the secretary's office, I think I don't know if it's still through the process of emails.
Okay,
That
I'll
you
get it.
approve.
All right, so, thank you.
Thank you, Appropriations Committee.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to adjourn the committee for today.
see you at 4:30.
No,